All right, so it's the big story of the day. President Cyril Ramaphosa has been at the state capture inquiry, and he's told the Commission today that he considered resigning when state capture first emerged. Testifying in his capacity as head of state and former deputy president of South Africa, Ramaphosa has also denied interfering in Eskom affairs, saying firing Matsela Koko was in the interests of the economy. Let's bring in our reporter Govan Whittles, who's been monitoring proceedings all day for us. Good evening to you, Govan. Thank you very much for joining us. We know that the President said in his opening statement that when he heard about state capture, and he says that the Gupta leaks for him really painted the full picture of just how bad things were, that he was faced with 5 options that he had to consider in terms of his way forward, and one of them was possibly to resign. Tell us a little bit more about that.
That's right, and good evening, Sally. He said if he resigned, he probably would have received a lot of praise from South Africans across society, different sectors. But he said that was a strategy which had short-lived victories, but in the long term would have probably entrenched the state capture network within the South African state. And he even said that if he had considered motivating others, or others had chosen to resign alongside him, they would have gotten praise, but this would have further entrenched it. And then some of the other options that he considered was being more confrontational within the cabinet, but he said that that would have led to him being kicked out of the cabinet, and therefore he didn't think that was a wise move either, because it would have entrenched again the state capture network. So eventually what he decided to do was stay within the cabinet, raise his concerns, but in such a manner that he would be able to do something about it, as he says he is trying to do now. So that's really the context in his opening statement, which really painted the president as someone who didn't know what was happening among key networks in state-owned enterprises during 2 terms of former President Jacob Zuma's tenure, particularly the last term when the now president was the deputy president. And he had said that the Gupta leaks opened his eyes to a number of wrongdoing by the network within these companies. And today he even said that it was only after the Public Protector's report on Brian Molefe where he got to know some of the details. And we'll get to that in a minute, but let's just have a look at what the president had to say about these considerations of resigning and how to fight the project of state capture from his perspective.
The first option for me, Chairperson, that was available to me was to resign from the executive. While I would have earned quite a lot of praise from many quarters, this action of resignation would have significantly impaired my ability to contribute to bring about what I would call an end to state capture. The party have also realized what our lackadaisical approach to this has meant to the party in terms of support, because our surveys, our research has told us that ordinary people abhor corruption, and they've not always seen the ANC as taking action against those in its own ranks who have been involved in corrupt acts. But now the game has changed. The line has been drawn in the sand, and the ANC is saying that we are renewing ourselves, and we are, Chairperson, possibly the only party in the land which has borne its own chests and said that we are prepared to hang out our linen in the open, and now, having drawn the line in the sand, we are going now to be very serious about dealing with corruption, because we've realized that corruption actually militates against the interests of our people. You may well say, well, why didn't you do so over a period of so many years? But it's better late than never.
Yeah, and the president kind of saying he decided to stay and play the long game, and that even accepting the nomination to become ANC president was part of that. He also went on later to cite some very concrete steps that have been taken to try and stop state capture. He talks about improvements in SARS, the NDPP, the PIC, the Fusion Centre, bringing the State Security Agency into the presidency, which he just did earlier this month. But also the issue of cadre deployment was quite a talking point, and there were some serious questions about judicial interference. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that relates directly to cadre deployment, and an interesting scenario discussed by the Deputy Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, as well as Advocate Paul Pretorius. And it relates to exactly how the ANC treats vacancies within the judiciary. So when there's a post available at the High Court, the Supreme Court of Appeal or Constitutional Court, and the ANC says that it would have been made aware of these vacancies, and its deployment committee, which the President describes as more of a recommending committee, would make these recommendations, but ultimately the decision on which judges to appoint would be resting on the Judicial Services Commission. Now, this turned interesting when Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo asked the President, wouldn't the fact that the ANC Deployment Committee recommends specific people place undue pressure on ANC MPs that are members of the Judicial Services Commission? Let's have a look at what he had to say.
If you want to influence, do it transparently. And I would buy into that. Do it openly and say, we support this one and that one. And in the end, even the public does get involved sometimes when there's, nominations for judges or top positions. They will say, this one is preferable. And when that person has not been appointed, there's an outcry that, they left out this one and so on. So influence, yes, but appointment, no. Because in the end, the ANC Deployment Committee is not the appointing structure. And whatever the appointing structure is, including the president, when finally names, as our process dictates, names are presented to the president will also take into account the processes that took place in the Judicial Services Commission. So I can hear Mr. Pretorius is going very hard on this issue of influence, but I'd like to say, whatever the influence would be, will always be tempered by the inability of the ANC Deployment Committee to appoint.
It was really interesting, actually, how that conversation ended up, because the point was made that in many other countries, it is quite clear what the politicians feel, who would be the best appointment to the Supreme Court, for example, in the USA. And sort of the decisions, the President actually agreeing with Deputy Chief Justice Zondo that, in a way, it's better to be completely open as politicians about what you believe or who you believe should be in those positions. I want to move on now. He dealt very specifically with the allegations made at the State Capture Commission against him by Brian Molefe and Matsela Koko. Tell us about that, and also some of the surprising things that came out around Brian Molefe.
Apologies, Sally, I couldn't hear much of your question, just a bit of audio difficulties. But regarding Brian Molefe, the President dropping a new bombshell, which is that he was the person that actually recommended Brian Molefe for the appointment of Eskom CEO. And this seemed to come as a surprise to the evidence leaders, who then asked him, Advocate Myburgh specifically asking him whether his recommendation of Molefe followed his tenure at Transnet, that the President perhaps was impressed by, and what exactly informed it. And the President pointing out that he didn't follow Brian Molefe's tenure at Transnet. Instead, he only looked towards his work at the National Treasury and in the PIC, and that formed the basis of his recommendation person. He's someone that the president said he thought had worked well with public finances. And Advocate Myberg going a step further, saying that, or painting the Gupta network, the Gupta link network to the president, and naming specific people who are alleged to have been part of that network, and how Brian Molefe was central to that network, and asking the president if he didn't know about that at all when recommending Molefe for the position of Eskom CEO. The president says he didn't know about that and says he only found out about Brian Molefe's links to the Gupta family through the Public Protector's report. But let's have a look at more specifically what he had to say regarding Brian Molefe.
No, I was not aware of this meeting. Like everyone else, I got to know about the suspension of those executives, some of whom we interfaced with at the IMC, and they were suspended and they were gone. And I was not aware of the meeting and the discussions and the decision.
All right, that was Govan Whittles, and thank you very much for chatting to us, just giving us the very important moments from the President today appearing at the State Capture Commission. Of course, we're going to have plenty more analysis on what